What if the Japanese won the Battle of Midway? Picture yourself as a Japanese civilian in June of 1942. Your nation has been fighting for years, and recently you have the upper hand. You have seen the Japanese attack the Americans in Pearl Harbor, push into the Philippines and Southeast Asia, cripple the British at Singapore, leading Winston Churchill to call it the worst defeat in British military history, and you appear to be on the verge of winning the Pacific War. However, then came the decisive blow to the Imperial Navy
Yeah,
at
you
the
stopped
Battle of
watching the
Midway,
parties in the
which
back.
was what the Battle of Stalingrad was to the Germans in the European theater. So let's get the lowdown on the decisive defeat for the Japanese, which basically turned the tide of the war in the Pacific. So it seems like General Yamamoto, I hope I pronounced that right, wanted to destroy all of the remaining aircraft carriers of the American Pacific Fleet, which were somehow miraculously not in Pearl Harbor when it was bombed. But then, the Americans were able to break the code that said that Yamamoto was going to attack Midway Island. So Nimitz, the American commander in the Pacific, put a bunch of aircraft carriers in place, waiting for the enemy. Yup, that was the first big problem for the Japanese. Then the Americans found the Japanese on the 4th of June, and basically all out attacked.
Yeah, you stopped watching the
Since the
parties in the
first wave
back.
of planes didn't work, which were launched from Midway, they launched them from the aircraft carriers themselves, which did kind of work. The first waves of torpedo bombers were slaughtered, and the dive bombers only found the Japanese crew out of sheer luck. They had gotten lost. And to add to that luck, the Japanese aircraft carriers were basically sitting ducks while they were refueling and rearming. So the Japanese were basically slaughtered. The Americans sank 4 aircraft carriers, a heavy cruiser, and brought down over 300 airplanes and 5,000 men to the murky depths of the Pacific Ocean. The Japanese were devastated by the loss, with thousands of trained mechanics and air ground crew members going down with the ship. Thus, the tide of the war was turned. But what if on that fateful day the Americans didn't find that
Yeah, you
Japanese
stopped watching the
ships
parties in the back.
out of sheer luck? What if they really did get lost and never found the Japanese? Well, let's also go a step further then and say that the Japanese scout planes find the American fleet. They sink the American aircraft carriers Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet. After this crippling loss, would history be any different? Well, the Japanese would be given a free pass to invade more islands in the Pacific, such as Tonga, and would probably launch a larger invasion of northern Australia as well. In our timeline, the Japanese did bomb Australia, though a large scale invasion never took place. Also, if you're considering that the Japanese would perhaps move on to Hawaii and even launch an invasion of the West Coast as a result of this victory, give up those dreams right now. The Japanese didn't have much of a logistical capability, especially
Yeah,
on the
you stopped
scale of
watching the
invading
parties in the
Hawaii,
back.
which is defended by well over 150,000 troops. So don't expect them to invade the US, other than perhaps Alaska as they did in our timeline. Even if the Japanese won the battle, the Americans would still win, just due to sheer industrial might. The Americans had 2 times the population of Japan, 17 times its national economy, and basically dwarfed it in every way. To illustrate how big of a difference this was, look at this chart, which shows the Americans could easily recover from the losses at Midway. It shows the total amount of war making potential that each country had. And if you look at that chart, well, the Americans basically have it down. The Japanese could not recover from the losses at Midway, which is why it was such
Yeah,
a
you stopped
decisive
watching the
defeat for the
parties in the back.
Japanese. In the alternate timeline, the Americans wouldn't see the battle as decisive, but it would be a wake up call for Roosevelt. He would have to shift more resources to fighting the Japanese, thus taking some pressure off of the Germans in the European theater. This means that in both cases, the war will be held out longer, although the conclusion is kind of inevitable. The Allies would win, and the Axis powers would lose, like in our timeline. However, how that actually happens is up to debate. First of all, the Americans would beat the Japanese, but with more resources focused on them. The Germans get to hold out longer. Also, the Soviets would begin to exert more control over Europe, and push maybe even past Berlin, since there is a less Allied presence in Western Europe. We could perhaps even see the whole of Germany fall into Soviet hands, while the Americans are busy in the
Yeah,
Pacific.
you stopped watching the
Of course,
parties
by
in the
about
back.
July of 1945, the Americans would have developed some nukes. And since the war is dragged out longer in both theaters, I think it is almost inevitable that the Americans would drop the bombs on Germany, the original country planned for the bombs. So in this alternate world, both Germany and Japan received the bombs, and both of them will be occupied by respective Allied powers. The Soviets, already in control over Germany, solidifies their rule and further expands their influence on Western Europe. In our timeline, Europe will be much more poor, weakened under the brutal communist rule, and resembles Eastern Europe. Also, the Americans will likely lose a key ally in the Cold War to come, although the threat of bombs will keep the two superpowers in check. Well, that concludes our What If the Japanese
Yeah, you
Won at
sound
Midway
watching the
timeline.
parties in the back.
Like and subscribe for more great content, and this is Scholar of the World, signing out.